Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again, and by strange coincidence, Imprint have released science fiction movies this month, and they've sent them to me. There are 3 science fiction movies and 1 that I received that isn't. So I'm going to do the 4 of them, and thanks to Imprint Vision for sending these ones through. Now, Imprint this month has reached 300 releases. Don't worry, you don't have to get all of them. I haven't got all of them. There are some I didn't particularly want. There are some I couldn't afford to get. If you have an Imprint video, and it's a popular one, the price on the resale market goes up enormously. There are Facebook groups where Imprint movies are going for crazy amounts of money. I'm not saying speculate on them, enjoy the movies as movies, but it just shows how much people appreciate this particular label. So to celebrate 300 releases, Imprint have put out an enormous poster with the titles of all 300 movies there, which is kind of cool. And I've got to find a place for it. Maybe I'll stick it up in between Thief of Baghdad and The Face in the Crowd. Who knows? I may even find a frame for it, because that's a hell of an achievement, particularly for an Australian boutique brand, to pump out 300 movies on Blu-ray and 4K, some of them, from Australia and selling it internationally. It's a really great effort. So it's time for me to start talking about the movies. How about that? This one's an obscurity that I saw, I don't know whether I saw it on VHS or whether I saw it in a cinema, but it's from 1981, and Lou Grade made it in England, even though it does have American stars in it, and one Egyptian star. It's based on a novel by Gerald A. Brown, who also did another novel, which was the basis of a 1974 film called 11 Harrow House. This Gerald A. Brown guy tended to specialise in writing novels about large gem heists, which is a very niche thing, but he seemed to make bucks out of it. And this one is called Green Ice. It stars Ryan O'Neal, Anne Archer, and Omar Sharif. It's also got John LaRoquette in it, which makes it a little more interesting. And it's filmed mostly in Mexico, even though it's set in Colombia. Colombia in 1981 wasn't the place you wanted to film, so they filmed this one in Mexico. Read the back cover blue, and then we'll talk about the details on the Blu-ray. In Mexico, romance ignites between electronics expert Joseph Wiley, played by Ryan O'Neal, and socialite Lillian Holbrook, played by Anne Archer. But she is on her way to marry emerald magnate Mino Argenti, played by Omar Sharif. So you've got an Egyptian playing an Italian. When Lillian's sister is killed, she suspects Argenti is the culprit, leading her and Wiley on a mission of revenge by raiding Argenti's vault of emeralds. Now, Argenti is the guy who controls the emerald trade in Colombia, and Colombia is the main source of emeralds. So Ryan O'Neal's electronics engineer is traveling around Central America. He meets up with Lillian. They have a bit of a flirt. He hasn't decided what he wants to do with his life. His last business fell through. He accidentally gets the room intended for an emerald buyer and tries to scam the people who call him up to do an emerald deal. That doesn't work. He gets shot in the ass, literally gets shot in the ass, and gets rescued by Lillian, played by Anne Archer. So Lillian is engaged to Argenti, and Wiley meets Argenti through her. And Argenti has the tallest building in Colombia as his headquarters, and he has a vault full of emeralds at the top of this building. There's radar on the roof, so you can't land a helicopter on there to steal it. The windows are bulletproof. The building is tall. There's security guards everywhere. But Wiley, along with Lillian, decides that he is going to rob this place. The special features on the movie are pretty good. 1080p high-def presentation from a 2024 scan of the original camera negative. Extended cut of the film upscaled to high-def. Audio commentary by author David J. Moore on the extended cut from 2024. Gravity artist. Stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong on Green Ice 2024. Vic Armstrong was also the stunt coordinator on things like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Isolated music and effects audio track featuring the score by Bill Wyman. This is the first soundtrack Bill Wyman ever did a score for. Textless titles featuring Maurice Binder design sequences. The title sequences for this movie were created by Maurice Binder, who did all of the early James Bond films. And there's a theatrical trailer. So there's your front. I kind of like this artwork. It's very, very comic booky 1980s. There's the back with the green cover. That original artwork, which is very of its time too. And on the back you've got that. Inside, you have the disc, and you've got Anne Archer and Ryan O'Neal in bed together there. It looks good. It's not a perfect film from the sense of having a perfect original. There are a few artifacts on the screen, but it's pretty good in general. You're not going to get better. I watched the movie too, and here's my take on the movie. It's a good caper film. It's honest. The direction is kind of workmanlike. It was written by a guy called Ernest Day, who was actually the second unit director who took over when the original director quit the film. Here's my problem with the movie. Tonally, it's all over the place. It doesn't know whether it's a comedy or a drama. It's got some comedic stuff, but it starts out with some very, very, very dramatic stuff. And Ryan O'Neal and Anne Archer are good actors, but they're TV good. They're not movie star good. And yes, I know Ryan O'Neal was in Barry Lyndon, and he was good with Streisand and What's Up, Doc. In general, Ryan O'Neal was a television good actor, and Anne Archer is a television good actress. She's also a Scientologist, but that's not neither here nor there. Omar Sharif was cashing a check to pay his gambling debts, and it's kind of refreshing when John LaRoquette comes in playing a friend of Wiley's, who has a really cool way of them getting on the roof of the building. And it's a technology which was cutting edge at the time of having one-person hot air balloons. So basically they strap a propane tank to the back of people, which is attached to the balloon and the burner. You put a helmet on because otherwise your scalp's going to be fried like bacon. And you could fly around one person with a backpack as the hot air balloon's propulsion system. Really cool concept. You don't see them around now. I don't know why, but they look really good. And it's an interesting use of that technology for the movie. There's also another technology called a descender, which is used by stunt people, where basically you can jump off the side of a building while you're attached to a line, and it will drop you all the way down to the bottom of the building. So they use that in the movie to great effect as well. But there are some really weird tonal shifts in this. There's a scene where Wiley and Lillian are imprisoned in the Colombian prison, and Wiley sees things like a prisoner being fed to pigs, and it's pretty clear when they get out of the prison that Lillian has been assaulted brutally while she was in prison. And the movie acknowledges that for a beat or two and a scene or two, and then it's totally ignored and everything's okay. It's a weird movie tonally, and even for 1981, it's an odd shift of character for that to occur and for there to be no repercussions long term. But it's a caper film, and living aside those caveats, it's a pretty entertaining one. So you might want to check out Green Ice. Then we get into the 3 science fiction movies, which is what you're here for. The first one was produced by Steven Spielberg. It's directed by Matthew Robbins, partly co-written with Brad Bird, who later went on to do many other things, including The Incredibles and Iron Giant and a whole bunch of other stuff. The original script was by Mick Garrett, and this one's from 1987. It's really, and it's very much in the Steven Spielberg subgenre of oppressive sentimentality. The sentimentality is rammed into your eyeballs in this one. It's got good actors in it, doing some good acting. But for me, that Spielbergian sentimentality that we had in the 1970s and 1980s just doesn't play. It feels like I'm trying to be forced to go, oh, and to tear up and to have strong emotional reactions to these films. And I don't like being manipulated by a movie to that extent. I don't mind a seduction, but I do mind somebody trying to impose the emotional state they want me to have in a very blatant way. And Spielberg's movies, even the ones he produced at the time, tended to do that. It's Batteries Not Included, which stars Jessica Tandy and Hume Cronin, an older couple who were in their 60s at least at the time, probably in their 70s, playing an older couple, of course. They'd been married in real life since the 1940s, had done stage work together, had done movies together. They're acting legends. You got them playing an older couple called the Rileys, who own a diner in a building that's about to be demolished by a developer. There are other people who live in the building. There's a pregnant single Hispanic woman played by Elizabeth Pena. There's an artist. There is a large black man who is a former boxer and may have suffered a brain injury while he was boxing. A guy called Harry, played by Frank McRae, whose character veers very much toward the magical Negro stereotype. The story is I'll read you from the blurb on the back. A group of poor tenants in New York's Lower East Side have nothing more than sheer determination to stop the destruction of their homes The feisty group are delighted when a few visitors from outer space drop in to help out. You got a 1080p high definition presentation, an extra called Bring the Good Things to Life, Directing Batteries Not Included, interview with director Matthew Robbins from 2024, an amazing story, Writing Batteries Not Included, an interview with Mick Garris, the writer, from 2024, Remembering James Horner, Scoring Batteries Not Included, an interview with Sarah Horner from 2024, and a theatrical trailer. There's the cover. There's the back cover. Inside we've got some interesting artwork there. And the back cover artwork. There's one of the little flying saucer aliens. And there is the disc, he said, holding it up awkwardly. As you might guess, I've got some notes on this one. Here's where the movie starts to try to manipulate you. Jessica Tandy's character is suffering from dementia, and she's being looked after by her husband, played by Hume Cronin. And she's forgetting things, she's doing silly things. She goes shopping to a market that's been demolished years ago. She keeps talking about their son who died many years before as if he were still alive, and keeps mistaking other people for her son. And here's my problem with that. It's Hollywood dementia. It's the kind of dementia that comes and goes depending on what the plot requires at the time. Whereas those of us who have real-life experience of family members with dementia know it's nothing like that. It's not the sugar-coated dementia that we get in this movie, and I found that really obnoxious. I found it just dishonest in the worst possible way. They didn't have to have that as a character beat in it, but they chose to. And also the character played by Frank McRae, Harry, with the acquired brain injury. Again, you've got two people with diminished mental capacity in this movie, where neither of them needed to be that. You could have had Harry on the autism spectrum or something like that. But no, they have to have somebody with a brain injury in there. It just rubbed me the wrong way. For personal reasons, I didn't like that part of it. Having said that, Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy are superb at acting the roles. They do a really good job with what they're given. And their natural rapport, having been married for about 4 decades by this stage, really lands their characters more than the script does. Elizabeth Pena is really great as Marissa, the pregnant woman, and she has some really nice character beats. Working with the artist character, his name was Mason, played by Dennis Boutsikaris. They have a nice chemistry about them as well. There's also a guy called Carlos who is trying to get them out of the building. He's trying to bribe them with money. He's trying to beat people up. He's played by an actor called Michael Carmen, who's one of the actors we sadly lost during the AIDS epidemic in the very late 1980s. And his character is written as a stereotype, but Michael Carmen manages to give it a little humanity beyond what the script has in it. But people aren't there for any of these things, really. They're there for the special effects. The little alien flying saucers who look like they were extras from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Each one of them has their own character, which is shown by the way they're physically manufactured, to the way they look, and also the way that each of these little spaceships acts. There's a mummy and daddy spaceship, and they end up having baby spaceships when they're given electricity and scrap metal and bits of electronics that the people in the apartment building have for them. And the babies are cute as well. It almost seems like they were designed to be made into merch, which never really occurred. And the little aliens have a magical ability to repair things. They repair a framed picture that gets torn up by Carlos. They repair glassware. They repair little bits and pieces of stuff for the households. And as Carlos and the developers ramp up, they do more and more repairs on the building until near the end, they repair the entire building. They're a bit like the cobbler and the elves in the old fairy tale, only these elves are basically fancy hubcaps. Now, this is one of those movies that if you saw it when you were a kid, you're probably geared to loving it and really appreciating it much more than somebody like me who saw it as an adult and still has my problems with it. But I think the actors are good in it. The special effects are done really well. There are little bits where the stop motion robots look a little bit off because there are matte lines around them and things like that. But for the most part, that's not really noticeable on the Blu-ray release. It's a kind of mid science fiction movie. And it's a weird thing to think it's for kids because the main focus characters are really old people. They're not kids. there's not a viewpoint kit in this movie, really. It makes it a slightly off part of this late 1970s, early and mid-1980s special effects heavy sort of science fiction movie. And I had to ask the question, who was the intended audience for this? And the answer is probably people who like gimmicky science fiction movies and like to have their emotions manipulated blatantly. But some people are going to like this one, other people aren't. But it's a good example of that genre at that time. And so we've got to give it credit for that. But for me, it didn't work. I love the acting. I dislike some of the characters. And I dislike the way the movie tries to manipulate your feelings in a very blatant way. So that brings us to the third movie, which is the one I enjoyed the most out of the four. A little thing called Strange Invaders, which has a killer cast and is an odd little alien invasion movie from 1983, which I really appreciate. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think that the plot beats hit really, really well at times. Terrific physical makeup effects. All credit to the crew for that. It was part of an intended thematic trilogy by the director-writer Michael Lachlan. The first one was a movie called Strange Behavior, which was the slasher film he made in 1981. The second one was Strange Invaders, and he was going to make a third movie, which was going to be a swashbuckling World War I or World War II adventure movie, but it never occurred. And Strange Invaders is kind of a pastiche of alien invasion movies of the 1950s. The story is this. In 1958, the town of Centerville, Illinois, is invaded by extraterrestrials who take it over, and they pretend to be the denizens of this town for the next 25 years. Meanwhile, turning all of the humans into crystallized glowing blue balls that they store on their spaceship. 25 years later, you got a Columbia University lecturer, Charles Bigelow, played by Paul Lamont, who learns that his ex-wife Margaret has to go back to that town because one of her family members has died, so she's obliged to go back there. He doesn't know she's an alien. Not much of a spoiler to say that it's in the trailer. They have a daughter called Elizabeth, and he looks after Elizabeth while his ex-wife Margaret is away. Margaret doesn't return, so he goes to Centerville and nearly gets 86 by the aliens. Bigelow rushes back to New York to tell somebody. He meets a tabloid journalist played by Nancy Allen, a woman called Betty Walker. He also meets a government UFO expert played by Louise Fletcher, who is really good in this one, even though it's a fairly small role. She's basically the Amanda Waller of this universe. The aliens have followed him to New York to take care of business, and things start going really weird. Both Betty and Charles get chased by the aliens. They've got to find a way to deal with this. They've got to find a way to deal with the fact that the aliens, after 25 years, are going back to their home planet, and they want to take his daughter with them because she's half alien. And so he has to fight this battle in the town of Centerville, Illinois, which is not a real town, to rescue his daughter and to stop the aliens from doing whatever they're doing with all of the human beings. This is one of those movies that knows what kind of movie it is, and it plays to that. Go through the details of the Blu-ray now. 1080p high-def presentation, and it looks good. Audio commentary by co-writer, producer, director Michael Lachlan, and co-writer Bill Condon. Strange Films, the Unfinished Trilogy, a video essay by film historian Jared Gahan from 2024. An isolated score by composer John Addison, who also did a lot of work for Mel Brooks's movies, and a theatrical trailer. The audio commentary by the director is from a while ago. Unfortunately, in his 80s, Michael Lachlan died of COVID complications. So there's the front, there's the back. I actually like that art. There's the inside artwork, which is even better. I think that's the one that was on the DVDs and VHSs back in the day. There's the back. And there is a bunch of the people in a car. There are just so many nods to classic horror movies in this one. One of the people in the town is played by Kenneth Tobey, who was in the Howard Hawks version of The Thing from Another World. You've got June Lockhart playing his mother. June Lockhart from Lost in Space, and Mark Goddard from Lost in Space turns up as well. We had character actor from the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s called Charles Lane, who died at the age of 100 and something, turning up, and he gets one nice little scene in this one. So you've got all these actors that people know visually from old movies turning up to do little one-scene bits in this film, and they do them really well. It's a lot of fun just going, hey, I know that guy, while you're watching this movie. Nancy Allen is really great playing the journalist. She chain smokes. She's kind of almost a Howard Hawks woman, in that she's independent. She does things her own way. She has a lot of fun with this role, and it's a really engaging bit of work. And Paul Lamont playing it a little more seriously is pretty good. The most interesting character, though, is Margaret, played by Diana Scarwood, who played the adult version of Christina Crawford in Mummy Dearest. The reason this character is the most interesting one is she's incredibly bad in the role. Now, I don't know whether she was going through personal things. She's since had a career as a character actress in many, many other things, and has obviously improved since 1983. But in this one, her character readings are incredibly bad. They are hypnotically, mesmerizingly bad.
I have to go to Centerville for a few days. I have to leave Elizabeth with you.
What happened?
My mother died. I've got to go back. Goodbye, Charles. Take good care of Elizabeth.
And just watching her in this movie is one of those things where you go, yeah, she probably had a bit of name value from Mummy Dearest. Oh no, it's a head desk, face palm kind of acting role. But that makes it more interesting while you're watching the movie. I was looking forward to that character coming back just so I could revel in how bad she was in it. Yes, it is kind of schadenfreude, and it is an unworthy thing for me to say that. But I did. That's how I felt about it. I was hypnotized by how bad her acting was. But those physical special effects of the aliens, and the aliens pulling off the human skin to reveal the alien heads underneath them, is really good. It's got that kind of sticky, stringy looking special effects makeup, which is a hallmark of 1980s special effects makeup, and is always a lot of fun to see in films. There are a lot of scenes shot on the streets of New York City, which gives it a slight Larry Cohen feel, which I really appreciated. And I just had such a ball watching Strange Invaders. This is the highlight of the four for me. It's the one that I was on the same wavelength as the filmmakers with it. Not a perfect film. The pacing is a little off. There's a nice little role for a character actor called Michael Lerner, playing somebody affected by the alien invasion in a very unusual way. He's good in that as well. You should check out this one, because if you're into science fiction, and particularly 1980s science fiction, it's an honest little piece of work. That then brings us to the earliest of the four, the 300th release by Imprint. A little film directed by Richard Compton called Ravagers, which has Richard Harris, Ernest Borgnine, Anne Turkel, Art Carney, Woody Strode's in there as well. It's a post-apocalyptic movie. Came out the same year as Mad Max, but it's nothing like Mad Max. I'll read you the blurb from the back. In the aftermath of a global catastrophe where lawless bands roam the earth and terrify what is left of society, a man named Falk, Richard Harris, lives in a deserted steel mill with his wife, who is assaulted and killed by a gang of hoods. Seeking vengeance, Falk becomes a vigilante. That's a very simplistic look at it. Now, all you get on this is a high-def transfer. It's a 1080p high-def transfer. There are no extras on this one. It was based on a novel called Path to Savagery by Robert M. Minolta, who was a pulp writer of the 1960s. So there's your front. There's your back. There's Richard Harris looking dead serious. This is after he did movies like A Man Called Horse and Return of a Man Called Horse and all those kind of things, and was styling himself as something of an action star. There's the back one. There he is with his wife, played by Alana Hamilton, who was married to George Hamilton and then got married to Rod Stewart. She's not as bad as Diana Scarwood is in Strange Invaders, but she's not a good actress. This is not a good post-apocalyptic movie. The title card comes up with a matte painting left over from one of the Planet of the Apes movies. And then there is a crawl which tells us that there's no living things left on Earth, no plants, no animals, no nothing. Whereas when the characters are wandering through the landscape, it's pretty clear there is vegetation. Falk and his wife are living in an old steel mill, and he's scavenging, and he encounters a group of Ravagers led by a character actor, a big, tall, gaunt character actor called Anthony James. You've seen in any number of things. He's in Vanishing Point. And his band of Ravagers decide they're going to kill Falk and his wife. And the leader of this gang, Anthony James's character, who never gets a name, tells his men whoever finds her first can have her. And they find her, they assault her and kill her. He doesn't take a part of that because it's very clear from the movie that he is in a relationship with one of the other men. Falk finds his wife and buries her, and then goes to try to get revenge on the Ravagers and kills the boyfriend of the Anthony James character. So in a weird way, it's like death wish on both sides. Falk is enraged and wants revenge, and Anthony James's nameless character is enraged and grieving and wants revenge as well, and ends up following Falk and the people he picks up along the way through this post-apocalyptic landscape. Falk leaves the city and stumbles on an old museum of rocketry, which is actually in Huntsville, Alabama, and meets an old soldier called Sergeant, played by Art Carney. That role was originally supposed to be just a small role, and then he gets killed. But Art Carney brought so much bits of business and was so engaging in the role, they kept him all the way through to the end of the film. Here's Sarge is a little bit addled and a little bit crazy, but also very resourceful, and he's a soldier, and so he's useful. He's got a really nice submachine gun, which Falk ends up getting. He's useful and resourceful. He knows the area, and so when they meet up with a group of survivors who live in a large cave complex, it's Sarge that helps Falk through the encounters with those people who live in a very transactional society. They tend to trade things for everything. And he meets a woman there called Faina, played by Anne Turkel, who was married to Richard Harris at the time, who sleeps with him for half a pouch of tobacco, because everything is transactional in this little post-apocalyptic society. She decides to stick with them and follows Sarge and Falk as they flee. They eventually encounter a group of people living on a large ship anchored behind an island off the coast, led by Ernest Borgnine. These people have stored enough food and diesel fuel and everything else for at least 50 years. And the guy who scavenges for them and goes out and brings back resources is played by the wonderful Woody Strode, who's very underused in this movie. So they get taken into this society, which is being run almost as a cult by Ran, the character played by Ernest Borgnine, who is creepy as hell, but doesn't quite come across as a kind of charismatic leader who could lead a whole group of survivors for multiple years. The Ravagers find out about it and attack the ship, and things move on from there. The movie had potential to be good. It came out at the same year that Mad Max came out, where everything was hyperkinetic, and Mad Max, of course, was played like a Western. Whereas this one, it was very much by the beats. It was, for a post-apocalyptic movie, it's crazily careful. It's really kind of cautious about the way it shows the post-apocalyptic society. And there are characters in it who are wasted. There's a blind lawyer played by Seymour Cassel who gets like 2 scenes and then gets killed. His character I wanted to see more of. Seymour Cassell's a superb actor. Did a lot of stuff with John Cassavetes. Would have been really great for his character to survive a little longer, but he gets hit on the head with a rock and drops dead. And there's a weird time thing where Falk tells people that he only remembers the old word from his childhood, and obviously Richard Harris was in his late 40s at this stage and kind of ravaged by alcohol. And yet all of the promotional material for the movie says it's set in 1991. So unless the apocalypse happened in 1952, which it didn't based on the technology available, there's a weird discrepancy between what Richard Harris's character tells us and what the movie itself tells us. It feels like the role was intended for a much younger actor, somebody who would have been in the early 30s at the latest. And that kind of miscasting always brings you out of the movie. Ravagers there's the bones but not the muscle of a good science fiction movie. And I find that really disappointing. I remember when it was going to come out, I was hungry for good science fiction. Everybody was doing Star Wars pastiches at the time because Star Wars was really big. And I wanted something with a little more grown-upness to it. And when this came out, I saw it and I just went, okay, yeah. And at that point, where science fiction was starting to become the preeminent genre in film, To have an ordinary studio programmer that plays things too carefully and gives you the same actors we've seen in 15 other movies like Ernest Borgnine and Richard Harris, Art Carney to a lesser extent, he'd just been really big in Harry and Tonto. But Woody Strode being wasted in the movie, and Borgnine playing against type, it just doesn't work. So that's my thoughts on the movies. I think that it's interesting that Imprint are putting out a whole bunch of these films, but in this particular group, I don't think there's a really great movie in any of them, and there's at least one that's really deeply ordinary. But there they are together. A lot of people are going to get them because they're completists on Imprint, but I know there are much better upcoming movies from this particular label. Some people are going to enjoy them much more than I did, but my job here is to give you my honest opinion of things. And unfortunately, that means that there are going to be times when Imprint send me things when I'm not going to particularly think that they're as high a quality or as interesting as some of the other things they put out. Sorry to the people at Imprint if they don't like that, but I've got to be honest about these things. I love a lot of what Imprint does. I love a lot of the movies they put out. But with the exception of Strange Invaders, I didn't really like any of these films a lot. And that is totally on me, but that is how I see it. So thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave me a comment or an emoji. Tell me what you thought of these four and whether you liked them a lot more than I did, because there are going to be people who did. There's going to be an audience for these. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got a really weird little film with a couple of different gimmicks attached to it. And until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some science fiction movies, because that is a genre we love. And I'll catch you next time.